Hi, folks. Today we're going to take a little look at how the British, the intelligent, middle class, very establishment kind of Englander, how these folks thought of themselves, at least through the eyes of Alfred Lord Tennyson. Yes, longtime poet laureate of England, the kind of model of the English establishment, and all of these things. And we're going to look through our little sampling through Tennyson's visions of myth, both the kinds that were heavy in Oxford, yes, Oxford and Cambridge, and the standard British education with the classical education, lots and lots of Homer. So we will visit the aftermath of the Odyssey for one poem, and then British myths. Yes, King Arthur, the model and magic King of England. First, Ulysses. This little poem, as you read it, you'll see this aged Ulysses after the Odyssey and such as that. Now, the poem was written by Tennyson before Arthur Henry Hallam's death. Hallam's death was a big shock to Tennyson, happened when both were young men. Yes, Hallam ended his life as a young man, so I guess he got more shock out of it than Tennyson. But at any rate, it occasioned Tennyson's 9-year sabbatical from publishing and spent the time writing his elegy to Hallam in memoriam, which is worth a glance in pieces, the series of quatrains in which Tennyson tries to come to terms with grief. But, well, Ulysses wasn't published until after Tennyson resumed writing for the public and publishing, and so it's very often misread. People get autobiographical and go in the wrong direction and say, oh, this is about him coming back to the fray. No, no. Tennyson wasn't an old man when he returned to writing. This Ulysses is an old man, not a young, disheartened one. This is the Ulysses after the Odyssey. It's a dramatic monologue form, so we have Ulysses's voice. He is speaking to an uncertain, indistinct audience. A dramatic monologue is a poem that works like a stage monologue where the speaker fully offers his thoughts, reflections, or whatever in the fashion one offers them to an audience. Source standard, the classic myths. Again, this is the Odyssey or afterwards. Ulysses has had his great adventure. He has spent 10 years coming home from the Trojan War. He has defeated the suitors and has his wife again, Penelope, and is there and has this ugly, grubby little kingdom to run. And he doesn't know the least about running an ugly, grubby little kingdom. He says, well, my son can run this better than I can. This is for dullards as far as he is concerned. So he's dissatisfied. He's an old man who wants to end his life as he lived it. He wants to be an adventurer, not a king. So we end with him sailing forth on a last adventure, and you get to read, think, and analyze and say, oh, is he really going to find new life out there? Or is this, in effect, a search for death? Or is it in some fashion both? As he wants to sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules, he wants new worlds, which would mean not this life and this one, but meantime, he wants last adventures in this one. Now, Tennyson's Idyls of the King and his Morte d'Arthur, which is what we assigned here, or which is like the death of Arthur in Idyls of the King, but different. He wrote them at different times, and such as that. Yes, those are tied to the King Arthur myths. Where did King Arthur come from? Well, first thing we know is that he was not a real king, not in full. No, there's no one who can be identified with him. But you find wisps of this and that because, yes, the heroes he is based on come out of real legend. That is, stories made and recast from the triumphs or alleged triumphs of real people. First tales were Celtic. You've got a little list in the notes on some of these things. Arthur, Gawain, or Gawain, as we would be more inclined to call him in the more modern forms, are tied to this Celtic or Anglo-Saxon and beginnings, battle leaders, and such. Lots of the tales came after the Norman conquest and have this French influence. Tristram and Isolde, for example, Lancelot du Lac, the whole character of Lancelot. He's Lancelot of the Lake, and we've got it in French. Come out of that strain. They were gathered by Sir Thomas Malory into his Morte d'Arthur in the 15th century. Malory was sitting in prison and gathered the tales and put together a nice big prose gathering. And that's the Arthur that we know, and the Arthur we take as the standard, and that Tennyson took as the standard and basis for his poems. So he put the Idyls together with a dozen poems in them, including a Death of Arthur that's a little different than the Morte d'Arthur were assigned. And he separately, a bit before that, wrote the Morte d'Arthur that you've been assigned. Overall, there is this suggestion, or at least acceptance, of the world of Camelot as a perfect place. Arthur achieved his great aims. He unified England. He did all of these wonderful things before he set out in search of the Holy Grail, the cup from the Last Supper. So Camelot, before Guinevere's adultery and the consequent feud between Gawain and Lancelot, Lancelot, while saving Guinevere from being burned at the stake, killed Gawain's brothers, and this set Gawain made him very angry, and it is why he wanted Arthur to pursue Lancelot and Guinevere into France, not because he was outraged over the adultery, it happens, but because people don't like it when you go around killing their relatives. It is that way. But at any rate, the society before that was supposed to be near perfect, or as perfect as human society comes. Justice, chivalry, and civilization. Yes, justice and civilization, very 19th century English notions, particularly that latter one, that last one, civilization. So, just thinking about that generally, instead of back with our specifics of the poem, you can look at the poem. You'll be kind of expected to, but I hope you know how to read the poem. But I want to bring out here the parallels of this notion of the wonderful England with establishment Victorian beliefs. England in particular, and Europe in general, that is, including the French and Germans, even though they were bitter rivals, but less so some of these other less civilized folks in Europe. Well, the British, the French, and the Germans were very right in going forth into the world and conquering it either economically or by use of troops and all of that, because they were bringing civilization to the world. They were bringing order and justice and law courts and British knowledge and all of the rest of these things. So we can take Arthur's tales as symbolically a justification of the European in exploitation and conquest of the world. Suggestion that for whatever short time, Britain has established world civilization. It won't be forever. Good things aren't forever, as we see at the end of Morte Arthur. Arthur passes and says, well, we have our short time because a good thing will become bad, will become corrupt if it lasts too long. But for then, it is such. Now, the passion for English myth, knighthood, and the reign of King Arthur was widespread. Wide enough spread that I'm ending up making this little presentation longer than some of the others, but yes, don't worry about that. We're on generalizations here again. In the arts, 19th century, you have a passion for green myths. Sorry about that. That is Greek myths. Wonderful typo. Okay, for Greek myths and the English myths can be seen in John Waterhouse's and Edward Burne-Jones's paintings. William Morris wrote several poems about knights and such. Not so well accepting as the Arthurian ones. His By the Haystack and the Floods is a very, very bleak poem. And he wrote a defense of Guinevere, suggesting, well, a woman who had to put up with Arthur might be driven to adultery. Arthur more interested in justice and these high abstractions and all of this stuff than in his marriage. The Robert Browning poem we'll look at, Sinners on a Despairing Night, and there are so many, many lesser works with knights. Yes, love them. Now, defense of British imperialism, yes, that's present heavily and throughout Tennyson, found in what we would term establishment, art of the Victorians, and in a lot of their fiction and such. Be a lot less present in Morris and the Brownings and some folks like that, but Morris was, yes, a vigorous socialist. Pre-Marx on this. Socialism and Marxism are not the same thing. More on that much later. But Morris, vigorous social reformer. The Brownings, very, very romantic in their outlook, if not really in their work. They wanted to consider themselves such. They were more clearly spiritual heirs to that romanticism. But establishment, England defended imperialism, and it was very vigorously defended later in the century. Joseph Conrad's prose, oh, we read it and admired it, and there are very good things to say about Heart of Darkness, but, ooh, you talk about racist. Yes, Conrad, nastily so. Rudyard Kipling's poetry, we've gotten out of the habit of teaching Kipling because his poetry is so terrible and so offensive. Both qualities hit it very, very well. It's bad poetry saying bad things. Kipling was more nuanced, more perceptive, less offensive in his prose writing, and he actually, yes, you can find lots and lots of ugly things to say about Kipling, but he had some sense of reality. So his prose, his Man Who Would Be King, is exceptional. Kim is good. And he wrote some non-political, inoffensive stuff and some terrible stuff. But Kipling gets a little bit of a bad rap. His poetry earns it for him. Conrad, yes, reminds us of this deep racism found in British imperialism, in European imperialism generally. Get back to Tennyson in sum, just to wrap up. Tennyson very representative of his England and his work demonstrated the sincere self-justification of the primary imperialist state of Imperial Europe. Remember, these people believed in themselves. British imperialism was not intentionally malicious, but don't tell that to the people it conquered, the people it enslaved, the people who were killed by the British Army, who was out there with the best of intentions. And yeah. So, as Arthur wielded Excalibur, he always thought it was for good. We can say that Tennyson wrote his Idyls, fully believing that. And for us, sorry folks, we know better. We are enough later that we can look at Victorian England, the age of imperialism, and see all of the flaws, all of the inequity, all of the horrors. So, don't get too mad at these people. They weren't trying to be nasty. Historically, we will find, no. People are people, and some of the things people do aren't the finest things in the world. But yes, we have establishment England justifying itself, and that shows up in the poetry of Tennyson.